Hello, Ji. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us, Ji. We have 112 registrations, which in the month of Ramzan is pretty awesome. Thank you very much for that. This is the first in a series of webinars that will try and make sense of these difficult, uncertain times. We wish we had a crystal ball to help us determine where we are heading, but in its absence, we have four outstanding speakers who will give their view on the consequences for Pakistan in the near future. We have shared their bios with you. Dr. Murtaza will start us off by discussing the likely fallout from the war on the Pakistan economy, the IMF program, and State Bank Ministry of Finance policy implications. Moeed Sahab will then focus on the political ramifications and possible opportunities and threats for Pakistan. Dr. Salman will next share the bigger context and why this is the beginning of global fragmentation and a world of wars with impact on asset markets and capital flows. Our final speaker, Samiullah Tariq Syed, will talk about consequences for energy availability and prices, clearly the most important variable today. Please note that it is being said that a 10% increase in oil affects our balance of payments by $1.5 billion. Each session will be about 20 minutes long, followed by a Q&A session. Please let me have your questions by WhatsApp, +92 309 042 1961. Thank you, enjoy the sessions, and happy Eid in advance, and over to Dr. Murtaza.
Thank you so much, Javed, and hello to everyone. Assalamu alaikum. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you today, and I'd like to thank the Pakistan Business Council and especially Javed for inviting me. Javed is an old friend. I'm a big fan of his and also a big fan of his father's, and Javed has inherited many fine qualities from his father. But one quality I think where he may even surpass Umar Saab is his sense of humor. And when he asked me to speak to you today, मैंने उनसे कहा कि भाई जावेद हालात इतने ख़राब हो गए हैं कि अब मेरे जैसे बंदे को बुलाना पड़ रहा है आपको. So he was quiet for a minute and then he said, हाँ मुर्तज़ा वाकई हालात इतने ख़राब हो गए. तो with that caveat, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'll speak for about 20 minutes on how I see the situation in Iran affecting Pakistan. And if you're standing up, you may want to sit down for this one, as they say, because it's going to be a little bit of a sobering outlook for Pakistan. I hope what I'm going to share with you today doesn't come true, but I fear that with each passing day, the things that I will share with you today may start to become more visible. So I've got a slide deck. I'm just going to load it up now. So my main messages are going to be 5 actually. The first message is that actually, if you think about it, unfortunately, Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries to this particular shock that we're going through right now. It is very vulnerable not just to a surge in oil prices, but also fall in remittances and any kind of fiscal squeeze that happens in the Gulf. And we unfortunately are also one of those countries that has the least policy space to cushion this shock. My second main message is that Pakistan is facing potentially, if this war continues for another few weeks even, yet another stagflationary shock, which will come on top of what has happened in the last 3 years. And you all know that the real incomes have been battered in Pakistan in the last 3 years. So we would have yet another stagflationary shock. Inflation would go up, growth would go down, and there would be extreme pressures again on the external account and the rupee, much like we experienced a couple of years ago. And I worry quite a lot about the ability of Pakistani society to take another shock like this so soon after the previous one. My third message is that, unfortunately, again, this seems to be the weakest initial position that Pakistan has ever found itself in the face of an external shock. It's the first time that Pakistan is facing a crisis that is kind of not of its own making. It's not as if we are overheating. It's not as if we've stimulated the economy excessively. In fact, we are just coming out of a very painful 3-year stabilization. So we're already, we were primed now to move towards something better, but unfortunately, we're going to be hit by a shock. And this is, as I said, arguably the weakest initial position Pakistan has been on the eve of a major shock. My fourth message is that, unfortunately, under the IMF program, because our fiscal and external buffers are so thin, there will actually be very limited flexibility. I mean, the IMF will try its best to give us a little bit more room, but we don't have much room, unfortunately. And so it's going to be like another classic IMF stabilization routine, where macro policies will be in contractionary mode. And in fact, if anything, they will compound the growth slowdown. There is a better way, I think. It would be nice if Pakistan could provide some fiscal stimulus to the economy and absorb some of the shock that we are facing on the external front. But for this, we need to very quickly increase our fiscal space and increase the inflows that we are getting into our balance of payments. I suggest that we should now do this through quite a serious debt reprofiling operation. We should think about what kind of financing facilities our trading partners might be able to offer us, not just on oil, but also on fertilizer and gas. And we also need very quickly our friendly partners to give us some bilateral flows. So these are my main messages, and I'll very quickly walk you through my logic. So just to show Pakistan's extreme vulnerability to what's going on right now, you can see Pakistan in this chart is this bubble on the top right-hand corner. And on the x-axis, you have oil, gas, and refined product imports. And on the y-axis, you have fertilizer and food imports. And on both those fronts, Pakistan is heavily exposed. And this crisis, as I said, is implicating not just oil and gas, not just crude oil and gas, but also refined products, fertilizer, urea, and food. So Pakistan, unfortunately, is right in the crosshairs because it imports so much of these commodities. And just, of course, some numbers. We all know that food and fuel make up about more than half the CPI basket. So there's going to be inflationary consequences whenever commodity prices go up. We know that 45% of our import bill is food and fuel. That's about $25 billion. And we know that about half of our remittances come from the Gulf countries. That's about $16 billion. So on all those fronts, we're exposed. The other thing I will note is that if you look at the last 5 crises that Pakistan has had since the early 2000s, 4 of them have been because of commodity prices, the last 4, in fact. And you can see in this chart, the blue line is oil prices, and the dotted orange line is our FX reserves as months of imports. And you can see that whenever commodity prices spike, typically our reserves go down and we have a crisis. Typically, when your reserves as a share of imports, months of imports, goes below 3, you tend to get into trouble. And that happens to Pakistan quite often when oil prices go up. We even had a crisis when oil prices only went up to 60. That was in 2018, 2019. But typically, when oil prices hover around 100, is kind of when Pakistan tends to have issues. I would also note that by historical standards, where we are today with our macro numbers is arguably the weakest position we've been in to absorb a shock in a long time, if not ever. What I'm showing you here is the last 5 crises that Pakistan has had, and then 2026, where we are today. And the blue bar, the extreme blue bar, is the average growth that we had in the 3 years preceding the crisis. You can see in 2026, we've barely been growing for the last 3 years, maybe about 2% on average, much lower than on the eve of previous crises. Inflation is the orange bar, and there again, you can see that we've had a huge amount of inflation in the last 3 years compared to the previous 5 times we've had crises. Our current account deficit, in fact, if anything, has been quite moderate. And our primary deficit, our fiscal situation, has actually been quite sound and prudent compared to the past. So the point here is that we are vulnerable because we've had very low growth. We are vulnerable because we've had very high inflation already. And this crisis is not really of our own making. We have not overstimulated the economy. We haven't had a current account deficit in the last 3 years. We haven't had fiscal situation being sort of seeing a blowout in the last 3 years. And on the right-hand side, you can see that the policy space that we have this time, as proxied by average debt service in the preceding 3 years, in the blue bar, and average FX reserve coverage in months of imports in the orange bar. Again, in 2026, where we stand today, we are arguably both on the fiscal and the external front at our most exposed. So we're not in actually a very good starting position to be able to absorb the kind of shock that we seem to be facing. Globally as well, if you look at where Pakistan is on measures of fiscal space and external space, measured here very simply on the x-axis, I measure external space by how many reserves you have in months of imports. And on the y-axis, I measure fiscal space in terms of your debt service in percent of exports. You see that Pakistan is, first of all, in the wrong quadrant, in the red quadrant, where you have low fiscal space and very low external space. And if anything, actually, it's at the most extreme. Pakistan is the dot right at the top. And the kind of countries that we find ourselves in the company of are Angola, Kenya, Egypt, Tunisia, Mongolia, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, Argentina. Not a very good group of countries to be grouped together with. And if anything, you will see in my latest slides that unfortunately now Pakistan's indicators make us look a lot like a sub-Saharan African fragile country. A few years ago, a decade ago even, we were more like Southeast Asian countries. But now, unfortunately, the group we find ourselves in is much more sub-Saharan Africa and fragile states. So what could happen? Another stagflationary shock, I think, is now staring us in the face. We haven't come out of COVID very well. The last 3 years, as I said, have been pretty bad for us. But what could the impact be on growth, on inflation, on other indicators? Here I'm showing you in the last 5 crises that Pakistan has had since the early 2000s, what was the impact on growth in the dark blue bars, what was the impact on inflation, the orange bars, and then the impact on current account, light blue, impact on the primary balance, purple, and rupee depreciation. So this is what happens to Pakistan in the year following the crisis. And you can see that the macro consequences have become worse and worse for us over time. And in the last crisis that we had in 2022, we had a rupee depreciation of about 35% in the year after the crisis. We had a huge growth contraction of about 6-7 percentage points. We had a huge spike in inflation. And the macro consequences, as I say, of crises have sort of been magnifying and amplifying over time for Pakistan. And I would also argue that we are in a very weak position to be able to absorb a further shock. Because if you look at what has been happening to our GDP per capita, which I'm showing you on the right-hand chart with the green lines for Pakistan, you can see that between 2015 and where we are today, there's basically a flat line. We haven't seen any GDP per capita growth in the last 10 years in Pakistan. This is very similar to what has happened to fragile and conflict-affected countries, which are shown with the red dots, and very similar to what's happened to sub-Saharan Africa, which is shown with the brown dotted line. So unfortunately, we begin to look a lot like countries like that are in sub-Saharan Africa and in fragile and conflict situations. Conversely, if you look at what's happened to South Asia over this time, it's done quite well. That's the yellow line. And if you look at lower middle income countries, generally the blue line, they've also done not badly over the last decade. Pakistan, unfortunately, is stuck. And of course, as you know, it got a lot of media attention. According to the Household and Income Survey in Pakistan, real incomes in Pakistan have fallen by 10% since 2018-19. So this is very consistent with the picture that you're seeing here in terms of GDP per capita. So what's my best guess of what could happen? I mean, we don't know. Hopefully, if this conflict ends tomorrow, we don't have to go here. But I think it's becoming more and more likely that this will be drawn out. And so what I'm thinking about is maybe a scenario where oil is at $100 on average for the rest of the year. It's not unreasonable. It's happened to Pakistan before, and we can draw some lessons from historical experience. But I would also say that there are much worse possibilities as well. It could well be that oil spikes further. It could well be that there is no oil available, no matter what the price. So things could actually turn out worse than I'm projecting as well. Hopefully they won't, but it's possible. So the first thing that will happen is that there'll be severe external pressures. Our food and fuel import bill will rise. Our remittances will drop. This could increase our external financing needs by $20 billion. Again, this is just based on what's happened to Pakistan before, when oil prices have been at $100. And this would more than deplete our reserves. We only have reserves of 16 billion. So clearly, if we don't do anything, we will have a very bad situation. We'd probably be in default territory. There'll be a non-linear decline in all our macro variables. So we have to avoid this. And the only way we can avoid this is by squeezing growth, which is contractionary fiscal and monetary policies, and by allowing the rupee to depreciate and act as a shock absorber to bring down the current account deficit. If we do that, we'll probably have a situation where the rupee slides by 10-20%. We could have an inflation surge of about 6 to 8 percentage points. We would have asset price declines and maybe credit rating downgrades. And all told, perhaps a contraction of 2 to 3% percentage points in our GDP growth. So that would take growth very close to zero for Pakistan in 2026. And there's no surprise about what the IMF will have us do. They've already told us what they will do. If you look at the last staff report on Pakistan, there's an annex which is called the risk assessment matrix. And there's actually a risk there of commodity price rise. And the policy response is classic IMF. Pass the shock on, provide some targeted social assistance, but maintain financial stability, which basically means that the rupee depreciate, and resist pressures to weaken fiscal discipline, build your fiscal and external buffers, allow the exchange rate to absorb. So what I'm proposing here as a likely scenario under an IMF program is pretty much, I think, what they've already telegraphed themselves as something that they would advise Pakistan to do if a shock like this were to come. But I would argue that this would be very damaging for Pakistan, not just economically, but also potentially socially. Because if you have hungry people, if you have people that can no longer pay for fuel, if you have people that have been forced to work from home or not even work at all, you are toying with social problems. So my sense is that we need to do something different. And we have an opportunity because the spring meetings are coming up next month, and our contingent there hopefully can make this case with the IMF and others that will be there. My first point is that while we do need policy space, we're not going to get much more financing from the IMF. They cannot top this program up because Pakistan is already heavily exposed to the IMF, and there's something technically called exceptional access that IMF allows, but that they only allow that to countries under very strict circumstances, and Pakistan does not fulfill any of them. So I don't think a topping up of the IMF program is likely. So what can we do instead? I think one thing we could try is to plug as much as possible our current account hole by economizing on fuel consumption. This may include, a sort of a COVID type scenario where we ask people to work from home. We shut things down for a few days a week. We should also think a little bit about ramping up our financing facilities, which are basically deferred payment facilities that typically the GCC makes available to us. We could think about expanding this to from oil to also gas and fertilizers, and talk to our Saudi, UAE, and Qatar friends to ease the pressure on our balance of payments. We could also think about how to build more FX cushion through additional inflows. FDI, SIFC has been trying this for a while. Perhaps now the urgency is even more. We could also think about bilateral deposits from, again, our friendly countries like China, Saudi Arabia, and the rest of the Gulf. But ideally, these should be longer-term deposits and not just a one-year thing. That would give us the kind of space that we need. And finally, to create fiscal space, I think we, of course, need to be cutting back on wasteful government spending. We should also seek, to the extent possible, multilateral debt service relief, like was provided during COVID under the DSSI. And we should also look to reprofile our debt. And this can be done in a variety of ways, as I will lay out. We can extend maturities, we can try to refinance, have interest rates be brought down, and we could even be more aggressive and look for NPV reductions and also haircuts. That, I think, would allow Pakistan to absorb this shock in a more prudent way for the economy and also for social stability. Let me now end with just a couple of slides on a couple of structural issues. Why does Pakistan keep finding itself in this exposed situation? First of all, it was a shock to me when I first came back to Pakistan that Pakistan consumes even more than the US. We've always heard that the US is a very consumer-oriented society, but if you look at the consumption as a percent of GDP, and these are buckets of countries, you can see that the US consumes about 75, 80% of its GDP. Pakistan, on the other hand, consumes more than 90% of its GDP. And we are with countries like Egypt, Mozambique, Zimbabwe. We are the most extreme bucket that I'm showing you here. This is a histogram on the right-hand side. We're at that red bucket. And more prudent countries typically have much lower consumption to GDP ratios. This includes our Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Korea. China, of course, is at one extreme. But certainly having a consumption to GDP ratio of 90% of GDP suggests that you're doing something very fundamentally wrong. The corollary of this on the right-hand side, and here I'm showing you exports as a percent of GDP on the x-axis, investment as a percentage of GDP on the y-axis. And you can see that, again, Pakistan is in the wrong quadrant. We export only about 10% of GDP, and we invest only about 12% of GDP. This is not the way a modern economy should be running itself. And again, if you look at the kind of countries that we are in the same league with right now, it's countries like Haiti, Sudan, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Angola, Ghana, Timor-Leste, Gambia, Ethiopia. So we are basically behaving in terms of our investment and exports very much like a landlocked country, not a country that has a big coastline or is in such a geographically interesting part of the world. And we're in fact investing and exporting almost like a conflict zone. This is actually quite surprising to me. I wasn't expecting this when I was making charts. Something else that we all know is that unfortunately our growth model has become very reliant on fiscal stimulus. On the left-hand side, you can see that whenever we stimulate the economy, whenever this blue line goes above zero, we have growth in the economy. And whenever we are forced to contract, the economy also contracts. So without fiscal stimulus, unfortunately, our economy is unable to have growth above 3-4% of GDP, to 3-4%. And on the right-hand side, we know that the corollary of having a very high consumption to GDP ratio is that whenever you grow, your imports also go up a lot. And this creates balance of payments problems. So we unfortunately have found ourselves stuck in a situation in the last 15, 20 years where we cannot grow without incurring more debt, and we cannot grow without jeopardizing our external accounts. More than that, on the left-hand side, you can see that our ability to finance a current account of more than 1% of GDP just doesn't exist. We don't have the financing for it. If you add up FDI, foreign portfolio investment, bank inflows, private sector inflows, and you average that for the last 5 years, you can see that on average, we can only sustain a current account deficit of 1% of GDP. Now, that's very low. Many other countries are able to sustain much higher levels of current account deficits, but we can't. So whenever our current account, unfortunately, goes above 1% of GDP, we begin to draw down our reserves, and that's a problem for us. And on the right-hand side, you can see that, unfortunately, in the last 20 years, since the early 2000s, our trend growth, which I'm showing here as the 3-year moving average of growth, the blue line, has gone from something like 6-7% to 2 or 3% lately. And at the same time, as that has happened, our dependence on debt has mushroomed. Our debt to GDP ratio, which is the orange line, has gone from about 45% at the beginning of the sample to about 70-80% at the end. So we are growing in a very unhealthy way. First of all, we are incurring more debt. But secondly, that debt is not at all translating into higher growth for us. Something is fundamentally wrong in our growth model. Let me end then with just my thoughts on debt. As I said, I think one way out of this hole for us is going to have to be seeking some kind of debt reprofiling. And what I'd like to show you first is how vulnerable Pakistan's debt situation is, both in terms of stock measures and flow measures. The x-axis here is government debt as a percent of GDP, which is a stock measure. And on the y-axis, we have gross financing needs, which is basically the sum of your budget deficit and your debt principal payments that are coming due over the next year. On both those fronts, Pakistan faces very, very high and elevated needs. Again, we're in the wrong quadrant. We are the red dot, close to the top of this chart, and we are with countries like Argentina, South Africa, Brazil, Angola. Not only is our stock and flow measure not looking good, but also if you look at the profile of our debt, it's unfortunately an outlier globally. If you look at the average maturity of our debt, it's about 5 years. That's shown in the by the orange bars here. And you can see that most other emerging markets and developing economies have much longer maturities. And on the left, with the blue bars, this is the differential between the interest rate and the growth of our economy. The more negative this number, the easier it is for you to sustain a higher level of debt because you can kind of grow out of it. You're not paying as much interest as your economy is growing, and therefore debt over time can come down. And unfortunately, in Pakistan's case, that number is barely negative. And you can see that most other countries have a much more negative differential between their interest rate and the growth rate of their economy. So the profile of Pakistan's debt too, unfortunately, is not very good. The sustainability of our debt, the IMF says, can only be guaranteed if we can keep a primary surplus of about 2% of GDP for the next 5-10 years. That is a impossible, I would argue, amount of fiscal austerity. It basically means that we have to run a primary surplus of 2% of GDP for the next 10 years. I really don't see how Pakistan will be able to do that. And without that, our debt becomes unsustainable. Finally, this is my last slide. I will just leave you with the following thought, that while it is a great thing that Pakistan is current on its debt obligations, there's a silent crisis that comes as a price of doing that. By pretending that our debt is sustainable and not doing any kind of debt reprofiling, we are actually defaulting on development. If you look at how much we pay as interest payments as a share of government revenue, it's about 60% in Pakistan. It's the blue dot in this dot plot. And the other countries here are all emerging market and developing economies of the world. You can see the ratio for them is much lower. The only country that has a higher ratio than us is actually Sri Lanka. If you look at our ratio of public debt interest payments to education, which is, an investment in your future of your country, again, we spend 2.5 times more on interest payments than we do on education in our country. And the only dot above us is actually Egypt. If you look at how much we pay in terms of interest payments to how much we pay as a ratio to how much we pay in terms of investment, we pay twice as much as on interest payments as we do on investment. And again, you cannot grow sustainably, you cannot provide job opportunities to your people if you have this kind of lopsided fiscal situation. And finally, again, Pakistan is the blue in all of these charts. You can see that our interest payments as a share of GDP, they're about 6-7% of GDP, and they make us a huge outlier compared to the average of emerging markets and developing economies, which I show you again as the orange dots here. This brings me to the end, and I'm sorry that the presentation wasn't more upbeat. I think we are facing quite a serious situation in Pakistan. There is a way to make it less severe, but it does require some difficult conversations from our finance minister and our central bank governor next month in Washington. Thank you very much, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Doc. That was fantastic, by the way. A couple of questions for you, which is coming from the field. This is the first question. The ratio of spending to GDP mentioned, isn't our GDP mostly undocumented, which will affect this ratio to a better level in real terms?
Yeah, it could cut both ways, to be honest with you. I mean, it could well be that, yes, our GDP is larger, and therefore the ratios start to come down. But then you also have to worry about measuring the numerator properly. So I'm not sure which way it will go, actually. It could well be that these ratios do improve if we include our informal economy, but it could also be that the numerator is also mismeasured. And therefore, I can only go by what I know about the formal economy. The informal economy in Pakistan typically has been the cushion when we've been hit by shocks, because we can find ways of absorbing external pressures through our informal economy. But I would argue that even if that is the play that you are expecting this time, the ability of the informal economy to absorb yet another shock after 3 years of what we've been through is probably at its lowest ever.
Thank you. Next question. In terms of reining in government expenditure, what are the top priority 3 areas you'd recommend to target wasteful expenditure?
Okay, I'm not going to be very popular with my government friends here, but I believe that there is a lot of wasteful spending, and unfortunately, it ends up being in things like what should be development expenditure. We have something called PSDP, which in Pakistan is unfortunately anything but development expenditure. So I would look at that first. In a normal country, you wouldn't go there, but in Pakistan, that's where a lot of I think slack exists. Secondly, I think we have to think a little bit about current expenditures that the government is incurring, including the salary bill, including state-owned enterprises, whether this will give us a motivation to actually speed up the privatization of some of our enterprises. It probably should. And finally, I would say subsidies. I think we provide a lot of subsidies that are untargeted on all sorts of things, and we should look at those as well. So those would be my top 3.
Thank you. One more question, Doc. Question for the panel. If RLNG supply remains constrained for 3 to 6 months, what's the state bank's likely posture on industrial gas allocations? Do you see a repeat of the 2022 rationing playbook, or is there appetite for letting market pricing allocate supply this time?
I would just make maybe I'll just make one point, and I think Samiullah, of course, is the right person to go into details. But I will say that I was there when we did the very difficult decision to start trying to ration things on the import side, and I would not advise going there again. It's a highly suboptimal thing to do. It's much better, I think, to rely, if you can, on other mechanisms to do it. That's just my reflection on the time that I spent and it was really because our backs were against the wall. We had no good options left. But now we have an IMF program that takes the worst possibilities off the table. And therefore, I think we should look at other mechanisms. But Samiullah, I think, is much better placed to answer this. Thanks.
Yeah, we will come to this, Samiullah, perhaps in your session. Doc, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. I've got tremendous feedback from everyone. You've got lots of fans here. So hopefully we look forward to seeing you. Please do stay on if you'd like to. We'd love to have you there. And we welcome Dr. Moeed Yusuf. Yeah, hi.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir. Over to you, sir. And thank you very much again for doing this for us.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm on the move and in a makeshift kind of arrangement, but I hope you can see me and hear me well. Thank you, Javed Saab, and thank you to the BBC for inviting me to do this. What I thought I'll do is really give you a bit of a deeper sense of why what is happening. Talk about what happened yesterday and who killed who. तो मैं शुरू करता हूँ इस बात से कि I'll structure it around Pakistan. तो पहले तो ये बात समझ लें कि Pakistan is truly in the eye of the storm. I mean, that's the only way that I can put this. उसका reason है. उसका reason ये है कि there are 3 theaters of great power contestation in the world that are smack in the middle of the geography where Pakistan sits. पहला है एशिया पैसिफिक, जिसको इंडो पैसिफिक कहते हैं. जापान से शुरू होता है और उसका जो वेस्टर्न बॉर्डर है वो इंडिया है, उस अलायंस स्ट्रक्चर का. दूसरा है जिसको मैं कहता हूँ फायर्स ऑफ द मिडिल ईस्ट. वो मिडिल ईस्ट नहीं बल्कि वो मगरिब से शुरू होता है, नॉर्दर्न अफ्रीका, एंड कम्स ऑल द वे, और उसका ईस्टर्न बॉर्डर हम देख रहे हैं आजकल प्ले आउट, दैट्स ईरान. तीसरा जो है वो एक्चुअली हमसे रेलेवेंट नहीं है, इसलिए मैं उसका जिक्र नहीं करूंगा, विच इज ईस्टर्न यूरोप. बट चौथा है रशियन बैकयार्ड ऑफ सेंट्रल एशिया डाउन टू अफगानिस्तान, which is where the first major great game of the 21st century was played out. That geography, that sits in the middle of these three, अफगानिस्तान, ईरान और इंडिया, जो बॉर्डर्स मैंने आपको थिएटर्स के बताए हैं, वो है पाकिस्तान। इसका मतलब क्या है? इसका मतलब यह है कि जियोपॉलिटिकली पाकिस्तान के पास कोई ऑप्शन नहीं है to ignore what is happening or to hide and hope that this great power contestation will pass us by and we will not become the grass that is trampled under the elephant's feet. So reactive mode में अगर आप रहेंगे, we have no way of surviving this. और दिस का मतलब मैं ईरान की बात नहीं कर रहा, ओवरऑल यूएस चाइना की ग्रेट पावर कॉन्टेस्टेशन की बात कर रहा हूं। दूसरी चीज इसमें समझने वाली यह है कि पाकिस्तान ने 2022 में अपनी फर्स्ट एवर नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी अप्रूव करके रिलीज की थी व्हेन आई वाज द एनएसए। वो आई एम श्योर सम ऑफ यू मे बी फेमिलियर, इट pivots Pakistan away from traditional hard security to geoeconomics. And the idea was to get into a space of cooperative geoeconomics, and economic security would be the core. Everything will be built around that. ये क्यों हुआ था, ये समझना जरूरी है। हुआ इसलिए था कि हमें ये आई ऑफ द स्टॉर्म नजर आ रहा था, एंड द कंसेंसस वाज कि अगर हमने प्रोएक्टिवली अपना मॉडल चेंज ना किया फ्रॉम बीइंग ए एड डिपेंडेंट कंट्री जो अपनी सिक्योरिटी सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड करता है टू द वर्ल्ड टू गेट फॉरेन एक्सचेंज टू रन आवर कंट्री, we will basically not be able to have an independent foreign policy at all, because we will be played by the great powers more than just US and China, other regional hegemons as well, including India, given our internal vulnerabilities. तो ये उसका मॉडल था। 3 पिलर्स थे: रीजनल कनेक्टिविटी, development partnerships, which basically meant that it was not only an aid-based growth model, but actually export, remittance, and FDI led. और तीसरा था no camp politics in foreign policy. We will work with all camps, US, China, and others. बस मैं इसको यहां पार्क कर रहा हूं, and I'll come back to this. You just keep this in mind. Now let's go to the Middle East. मैं आपको बिल्कुल सिंपली और क्रूडली इस तरह एक्सप्लेन कर देता हूं कि बड़े तज्जिए हो रहे हैं, पीपल लाइक मी वो अपनी थियरीज भी बता रहे हैं, ये भी याद करा रहे हैं, हमने बड़ी किताबें पढ़ी हुई हैं, दुनिया में ये हुआ था, इसने। वेरी सिंपली पुट, वी आर इन द मिडस्ट ऑफ ए रिलीजियस वॉर, दैट्स इट, देयर इज नो अदर वे टू एक्सप्लेन दिस टू यू। आप अपने आप को एक सेकंड के लिए सोच लें, जो कॉन्सेप्ट हम बात करते हैं कि रिलीजियस फर्वर के साथ रिलीजियस जंग लड़नी है बिकॉज इट्स डिवाइनली ऑर्डेन्ड दैट आई हैव टू गेट टू अ पर्टिकुलर कंक्लूजन, दैट्स द माइंडसेट दैट द ज़ायनिस्ट्स आर इन राइट नाउ। लेट्स नॉट गेट इनटू कि वो सही है गलत है, वो अलग बहस है, मैं आपको सिर्फ स्ट्रेटेजिकली एक्सप्लेन कर रहा हूं। दूसरी तरफ ईरान की जो स्टेट स्ट्रक्चर है रेवोल्यूशन का, वो बना ही 40 साल सैक्रिफाइस की बेस पे है to defend the sovereignty of Iran as a religious edict to make sure that they are not subjugated by the Americans and the Israelis. So ये जंग किसी भी तरह एक हाफ ऑफ रैम्प के तहत खत्म नहीं हो सकती, because the logic of the war is not only territory. दिस इज वाई यू कीप हियरिंग कि एक बंदा कहता है ऑफ रैम्प तो दूसरा कहता है नहीं, एक कहता है तो द एंड पॉइंट दैट विल बी एक्सेप्टेबल टू देम इज एक्चुअली आइडियलिस्टिक। यहां पे वो प्रॉब्लम है जिसकी वजह से यू आर सीइंग कि इजराइल इज पुशिंग अमेरिका एंड पुशिंग इट फर्दर इनटू द क्वागमायर एंड अमेरिका हैज गॉटन स्टक। उनका ख्याल था कि वेनेजुएला की तरह ईरान भी गिर जाएगा, वो नहीं हुआ, एंड इट्स गॉटन वर्स। सो ये अभी क्यों हुआ, पहले क्यों नहीं हुआ, उसका सिंपल आंसर ये है कि कभी ऐसी कॉन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ इंटरेस्ट नहीं हुआ जहां पे इजराइल ने पहले जेनोसाइड करके प्रूव कर लिया कि जेनोसाइड आज की दुनिया में अलाउड है। International humanitarian law is suspended because of Trump's personality. Second, it never happened that a US president thought that they would be able to get this through Congress and their system. वो भी bypass हो गया। तीसरा ये कि ट्रंप के इनर सर्कल में genuine well-meaning Zionists हैं, जो कि पहले इस तरह उनकी लॉबी और वो सारी बातें आप कर लें, बट somebody who had such a close ear of the president of the United States, इस तरह की कॉन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ इंटरेस्ट पहले नहीं हुई। अरब्स बड़ी देर से कुछ कह रहे थे इनको कि आप करें। आई थिंक दैट अंडर एस्टिमेटेड द इरानियन रिजीम एंड नाउ दे आर ऑल्सो इन अ फिक्स। इसकी आउटकम क्या है? कुछ चीजें क्लियर हैं, कुछ बिल्कुल क्लियर नहीं है। लोग मेरे से पूछते हैं जी कब खत्म होगा? आई हैव नो आइडिया, nobody has an idea. I cannot give you any answer better than you can give me, because ये forecasting होती है किसी rational calculus पे। ट्रंप के मॉडल में वो रैशनैलिटी अप्लाई नहीं करती जो हमें 50 साल से मैं पढ़ रहा हूं या कोई आपने पढ़ी होगी. सो आई कैन आंसर दैट क्वेश्चन. आई थिंक इट्स इररेलेवेंट राइट नाउ. जो चीजें हमें पता है, ईरान विल बी इकोनॉमिकली डिबिलिटेटेड whichever way they come out of this. Number two, US will have zero credit left with any Muslim population of the region, and the Arab countries will no longer be as confident about the United States defending them when it comes to these kind of situations. Israel could either come out to be the big victor by becoming the hegemon of the region, agar unhone regime collapse karwa li, or Arab world will of course be weaker. बाय द वे, जितनी दफा ईरान एक ड्रोन भेजता है या मिसाइल भेजता है ऑन अ गल्फ कंट्री, इजराइल बेनिफिट्स. जितनी दफा अमेरिका अटैक करता है ईरान को, इजराइल बेनिफिट्स, क्योंकि उनका असल गोल इज नॉट ईरान आउट एंड अरब वर्ल्ड इन. उनका असल गोल है इजराइल इन एंड ऑल द मुस्लिम वर्ल्ड आउट एट द एंड ऑफ द डे. एंड सो ये या तो वो बिल्कुल जी, या ये हो सकता है कि द regime holds on long enough and they are able to engineer assassinations in Israel that will then force the Israeli left population to get up and say enough is enough, which would be a bad outcome. ना इस वक्त regime गिरते नजर आ रही है और ना वो bad outcome नजर आ रही है, तो it's more of a stalemate that I think we are left with. One line about the Gulf, they're going to be hurt badly. If Iran does go down, they'll take them down with them. But ये idea कि जी दुबई खत्म, सऊदी खत्म, आइंदा नजर नहीं आएंगे, I don't think so. There's a lot of sunk cost involved by investors and the time to recover, but they'll be around. Iran के scenarios of regime, they will be debilitated either ways. एक ये कि regime holds and remains coherent, in which case Iran will actually come out of this looking better strategically. Economically, China unko aake bankroll karega to rebuild them. उस केस में the Arab world will actually have to accommodate the Iranians going forward. ये high probability नहीं है, but this is one probability. दूसरा ये कि regime remains, it's battered, it's bruised, and you end up in this odd kind of situation जहां वो भी weak है, Arab world भी weak है, and the Israelis are also not on top. And this is going to be a mix and match kind of messy kind of situation. The other outcome is regime नहीं रहती. उसके दो सिनेरियोज हैं. Israel succeeds in imposing a puppet regime, या एक सिविल वॉर का सिनेरियो बन जाता है जहां अमेरिकन और इजरायली सपोर्ट करते हैं कर्ड्स को, सीस्तान बलूचिस्तान में सुन्नी एलिमेंट्स को, टू वीकन द पेरिफेरी ऑफ ईरान. ये दोनों आउटकम्स पाकिस्तान के लिए डिजास्टर्स है. और अब मैं पाकिस्तान पे आ जाता हूं टू ब्रिंग दिस टुगेदर फॉर यू. पाकिस्तान के केस में हमें आइडियल आउटकम हमारी ये थी कि ईरान ओपन अप हो जाए, ताकि हमारे जो ईरान से ट्रेड, ट्रांजिट, एनर्जी, लेकिन हम ये नहीं चाहते किसी भी सूरत के वो एक पपेट इजरायली रिजीम के अंडर ओपन हो. बिकॉज अगर वो पपेट रिजीम के अंडर ओपन हुई तो देन द कॉन्वर्सेशन अबाउट ग्रेटर इजराइल एंड इज पाकिस्तान नेक्स्ट, एंड दैट विल बिकम अ रियल कॉन्वर्सेशन. आई एम नॉट सेइंग इट्स गोइंग टू बिकम अ रियलिटी, इट्स गोइंग टू बिकम अ रियल कॉन्वर्सेशन एटलीस्ट. दूसरी चीज ये है कि अब अगर the regime collapses, it's either a civil war scenario in which Balochistan और पाकिस्तान that will become very restive and very active. पहले ही हमारे जो अफगानिस्तान में हालात हैं वो आपके सामने है. We won't be able to handle that well. जंग prolong करे तो पाकिस्तान का नुकसान है, because the Arabs them kind of, तो वहां पे और ज्यादा chaos आएगा. दैट इज नॉट गुड फॉर अस आइदर. हमारा इशू ये है कि हम ग्लोबल चेस बोर्ड तो यूजुअली बड़ी अच्छी तरह खेल लेते हैं, लेकिन हम उसको नहीं कर पाते इनटू डोमेस्टिक सस्टेनेबल गेन्स इन टर्म्स ऑफ इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म्स. going to say कि जी थे लेकिन अब तो सर्वाइव है, so the maximum we can do is just stay afloat. And all
We can't hear you very well, Moeed.
I think Trump will जी, let me एक second, let me try and close the video and see.
We can hear you well now.
If this is better, is this better?
जी.
ओके सो व्हाट आई एम सेइंग इज कि हमारे हक में बेस्ट इस वक्त ये है कि ये जंग जल्दी खत्म हो. वी कैन कन्विंस ट्रम्प एंड पार्टी एंड आई थिंक ट्रम्प कैन बी कन्विंस्ड कि जो रिजीम के बाद आएगा दैट्स गोइंग टू बी वर्स. आपने अपने मिलिट्री ऑब्जेक्टिव्स अचीव कर लिए हैं, न्यूक्लियर प्रोग्राम, मिसाइल प्रोग्राम इज वीकेंड एक्सेट्रा. एंड अरब्स को ये बात समझनी है, अरब कंट्रीज को, स्पेशली सऊदीज एंड अमीरातीज, कि अगर ये ईरान की थ्रेट या जो भी आप कह लें खत्म हो गई फॉर इसराइल, तो सारा फोकस आप पे चला जाएगा उनका. And do you really want to be in that position? So I think that's really where we could end up. And then the Chinese will have to come in and essentially bankroll Iran to come back and stand up on their feet. I don't see any scenario in which the Middle East will go back to what it was. I can also predict for you that in the next 15 years, Middle East ke borders will not be the same. How they shape up, I don't know, but there are 2, 3, 4 countries that will probably have a different kind of sovereignty implications from this. Last point ये है कि मैंने आपको NSP का पहले बताया था. उसमें अगर आप नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी का सोचें, 3 चीजें: रीजनल कनेक्टिविटी, डेवलपमेंट पार्टनरशिप्स एंड नो कैंप पॉलिटिक्स. नो कैंप पॉलिटिक्स में वी हैव डन वेरी वेल सो फार. उसके ऑप्टिक्स बहुत बुरे हैं, सेल्फ रिस्पेक्ट एक्सेट्रा, बट वी मैनेज टू बी ओके विद ऑल रेलेवेंट प्लेयर्स. रीजनल कनेक्टिविटी इज इन टैटर्स, एंड उसमें आई थिंक अफगानिस्तान वाला हैज बीन अ मेजर सॉर्ट ऑफ स्पैनर इन द वर्क्स विद नो एंड इन साइट इन टर्म्स ऑफ एन एंड गेम. एंड डेवलपमेंट पार्टनरशिप्स तभी हो सकती हैं अगर आपके एक्सपोर्ट और जो नॉर्मल इकोनॉमी है वो फंक्शन करे. उसके लिए आई थिंक वी कैन एग्री टू डिसएग्री. इफ सम ऑफ यू डिसएग्री, आई थिंक 90% ऑफ द प्रॉब्लम इज इंटरनल and only 10% is because of the commotion outside. जब तक हम अपने domestic reforms नहीं करेंगे for ease of doing business and tax policy को reform नहीं करेंगे, the rest of the conversation is irrelevant. दुनिया में जंग हो रही है या नहीं हो रही. मुझे जावेद भाई, आपने कहा था द चाइना रशिया पीस, रशिया इज डेफिनेटली गेनिंग. उनको ऑयल सैंक्शंस में रिलीफ मिली है. यूक्रेन इज नॉट इन द न्यूज एज मच एनी मोर. चाइना के साथ अलाइनमेंट ईरान पे उनकी दोबारा से इज क्वाइट क्लियर. China actually is not gaining because China की energy disruption is huge because of the Middle East crisis. They don't want this to continue. They've also proven, by the way, very clearly that they are not a superpower. They're not ready to be a superpower. They want the Americans to face the brunt. They don't want to jump into the fray. That's not what superpowers are like if they're really into this space. But they will be looking at Iran for long-term reconstruction, rehabilitation, and bring Iran into their orbit. Pakistan को no camp politics ही follow करनी पड़ेगी. But ये no camp politics is a tool to get to economic security. वहाँ पे I think we continue to fail, unfortunately. And you know that PBC members know much better than me that space, but we are not being able to break that barrier. And I think कुछ अब ये oil और remittance pressure और आएगा तो उससे short term में कम से कम problems बढ़ेंगी. Let me stop there.
Dr. Saab, thank you so much. I have some questions for you. As you said, it's a religious war. Where do Gulf states fit in, and does it mean it can become a sectarian conflict openly as well?
अगर regime fall की तो हमारे लिए internally sectarian issue बनेगा. बिकॉज जो अगली रिजीम आएगी उसको मैनेज करना या जो भी होगा उससे कैसे डील करेंगे विल बी अ वेरी बिग क्वेश्चन. If the regime falls, Sistan, Balochistan will become restive. That also has a very clear security apart from sectarian, apart from military aspect. So वो problem आएगी अगर वो regime fall करेगी. इसीलिए मैंने कहा कि अगर कोई agnostic था about regime change, अब we can't be agnostic about it. That much is pretty clear at the moment for us. So उस केस में वो आ सकता है. Short of that, I don't think so, because Pakistan, I think, has done a very good job in terms of balancing a very difficult equation between Iran and Saudi Arabia for ourselves.
Now that Iran is pretty much closed and now Taliban can't substitute away from Pakistan for international trade, would that help Pakistan with TTA's attitude towards terrorism? Can you please speak more generally about the war in Afghanistan?
अफगानिस्तान जो है, you know, there is no war that is good जिसमें end game is not clear. In a scenario where victory is also in the short term a loss, then clearly it's not a good place to be. So problem ye hai कि military victory in Afghanistan essentially will lead to, अगर 100% भी हो जाए, so it will lead to a decapacitation of the regime in Afghanistan. So the question is, कि day after, what is next? Because there's not a single faction in Afghanistan that is positively disposed towards Pakistan. तो वहां पे there is a big question mark. दूसरा issue ये है कि the longer it drags, the longer the loss for your connectivity. Central Asia is closed, Iran obviously अभी closed है. और तीसरा ये कि India seems to have found an opportunity here because they were cornered after May. वो अब wholeheartedly fund कर रहे हैं अफगानिस्तान को, the Taliban, to commit terrorism in Pakistan, but also now supporting them in their media strategy. अगर आप देखें तो suddenly Taliban are talking about international humanitarian law, etc. तो ये सारा एक I think Afghanistan worries me frankly. I'm not privy to the strategy, so I can't say more than this, except that the longer this drags, the worse it's going to be. And regime change का concept, and I'm not saying this is the policy, but अगर regime change का concept जो लोग बात कर रहे हैं, I think it's a very dangerous one because there isn't another regime that's going to be positively disposed towards Pakistan.
How long do you think we can continue the no camp politics? But if push comes to shove, which camp should we pick?
I think it's a bad question, frankly. Pakistan ka jahan pe overwhelming majority of economic input comes from China, overwhelming majority of the economic output goes to the US. Ye option exists hi nahi karti. So we cannot actually pick a side till हमारी economic security का paradigm उधर पहुंच जाए कि we are not so vulnerable to everybody and we don't have to beg every capital to pass the next 6 months without being insolvent. So हमें दोनों के साथ ही काम करना है and in fact as I said we've done fairly well in this. अब इस chaos के बाद actually पाकिस्तान के लिए opportunities खुलेंगी, बंद नहीं होंगी. China will need a partner in Iran. The Saudis definitely and the Arabs will need Pakistan to defend them more. They are not as confident about the Americans. So opportunities होंगी no camp politics को drag out करने की. जो line मैं हमेशा कहता हूं या government में कहता था वो ये है that we should, as foreign policy, we should at least delay the inevitable moment when we may have to pick a camp for as long as we can. As we stand today, if we were to pick a camp, it would be China, but we will see when we get there. I think it's premature.
Thank you. And secondly, sir, what is the status of the NSP? Is the document being followed? Has it been put back on the back burner?
NSP follow, I don't know what the answer is. What I do know is कि वो implement तो obviously होती है system में चीजें, वो privy नहीं हूं मैं उसका. NSP ने revise होना था in 2026. And I believe there is an exercise that's probably ongoing because up with the world where it is, you need a new document that keeps economic security at the core, but then creates a realistic paraphernalia around it on how to get there in today's world. So what I can say is I'm less concerned about where the NSP implementation is. I actually would be far more focused on creating a new document. And again, I'm not privy to this, but 2026 may logically एक नया document तैयार होना चाहिए. And I think there's no better time than now given the flux in the world.
Thank you. Can you tell us what's the top 1 or 2 actionable steps for Pakistan's top leadership?
That's a broad question. I think तीन चीजें मैं कहूंगा. पहली चीज तो ये है कि they need to continue presenting Pakistan as peacemakers and mediators in these conflicts, which means कि अफगानिस्तान का भी किसी ना किसी पॉइंट पे वाइंड डाउन होना पड़ेगा. लेकिन मिडिल ईस्ट में कम से कम that's what we have to do. Second, I think we have to decide on a select number of key internal reforms that we should pursue. We shouldn't be trying to fix everything. We shouldn't be trying to say everything is possible. वो key multiplier effect जिन चीजों ने देना है वो हमें अंदर लाना है. और वो internal reform नहीं हो सकता जब तक आप जो angst in the society or social context contract है politically, उसको हम किसी ना किसी तरह resolve नहीं करते. और तीसरा मेरा view ये होगा कि we have to become far less celebratory about what we achieve, far more introspective about what we are doing wrong. एक बहुत बड़ी डिवाइड आ गई है आपके पावर ब्रोकर इलीट्स और सोसाइटी में. We can't just pretend that people are not sensitive to the fact कि austerity एक तरफ है और जहाज दूसरी तरफ है. This is now really becoming an issue of social contract. I'm not talking about one or the other issue. Generally, I think the elite, the power brokers in the elite structure are becoming more and more divorced from the sense on the street. और ये पावर ब्रोकर कोई एक नहीं है, मैं किसी एक गवर्नमेंट या इंस्टीट्यूशन या उनकी बात नहीं कर रहा. जनरली स्टेट जिसको आप कहते हैं, that has to come across as being far more sensitive to the frustrations, I would say, economic frustrations कह लें, social of the people. Then otherwise आपको जो unity चाहिए internally वो नहीं मिलेगी to make the difficult reforms.
Okay, one more question for you, sir. Then we'll let you go. What if the US decides to end the war? Then will the war be ended, or Israel and Iran will continue this on a smaller scale continuously, which would also affect economies?
US would at some point want to end. Israel would not want to end till there's total collapse or chaos. Iran cannot end without a face-saver in the regime ensuring that it's intact and will continue to live the day after. सो ऑफ रैम्प इजी नहीं है. ट्रंप कल भी कह सकता है, सुबह उठे कह दे कोई पता नहीं है. बट आपका जो सेकंड सिनेरियो है वो ज्यादा लाइकली है कि अगर ओवरऑल जंग खत्म हो भी गई तो कोई ना कोई इसमें प्रॉब्लम्स रहेंगी. एक ओवर आर्चिंग डील के तहत खत्म होती मुझे नजर नहीं आती, अनलेस वन साइड जस्ट कंप्लीटली गिव्स अप.
And Doc, one question for you. What's going to happen to Trump's vote bank in the US? Surely he's taking a hammering. Or is it...
अच्छा किया आपने पूछ लिया है. आई थिंक इट्स अ फेयर क्वेश्चन बिकॉज ट्रम्प का वोट बैंक तो हिट होगा, लेकिन उसने तो दोबारा वोट नहीं लेने. मिड टर्म्स में हार भी गया तो ही डजंट रियली केयर अबाउट द कांग्रेस. हाँ, एक वाइल्ड कार्ड जरूर सोचें बिकॉज उससे बहुत सी चीजें दुनिया में चेंज हो जाएंगी. क्या वो इम्पीच हो सकता है कि नहीं? I think by the day it looks likelier that there will be some movement in that direction after the midterms, especially because this war hasn't gone well for him, and even his supporters are saying that this is going too far. So अगर उस तरफ बात गई तो फिर बहुत सी चीजें चेंज होंगी दुनिया में. इवन इम्पीचमेंट का ये मतलब नहीं कि वो निकल जाएगा, बट इट विल बी बैटर्ड एंड ब्रूज्ड. क्या वो कुछ सेंस उसके बाद आएगी? आई डोंट नो. अगर निकल गया तो वांस क्या कर सकेगा? फिर कंट्रीज लाइक पाकिस्तान हैव टू थिंक, जिनका पर्सनल एक रिलेशनशिप ट्रम्प के साथ बना हुआ है जिसकी वजह से थिंग्स आर गुड. सो देन अ लॉट विल चेंज. सो आई थिंक दैट्स अ वाइल्ड कार्ड दैट समबडी हैज टू थिंक अबाउट ऑब्वियसली, एंड पीपल आर थिंकिंग अबाउट इट. शॉर्ट ऑफ दैट, इफ ही रिमेन्स इन ऑफिस, he actually isn't going to care about what Capitol Hill thinks.
And what is your view, Doc, on Europe? Do you think that there is support for Trump and for the Israelis generally in Europe, or are they going to? We've seen how Spain has reacted. You see a lot of other countries.
यूरोप का बेसिकली देसी जबान में ना 3 में ना 13 में. तो प्रॉब्लम ये है कि वो दे बीन सो वेडेड टू द यूएस एंकर कि they're making a lot of noise here or there, but ultimately they're unable to stand up and take any position. स्पेन की पोजीशन यूरोप की पोजीशन नहीं है. वो तो एक इंडिविजुअल लीडर ने पोजीशन ली है, पॉपुलिस्ट पोजीशन, because Spain has always been slightly as an outlier in this space. Otherwise, frankly, Europeans have turned out to be a bit spineless for now. They fear America more than anything else. They don't think they're ready to take on Trump. They also want to lie low and keep their sort of garden going while the rest of the jungle burns. I don't think you should expect much from them. I think it's going to be more normative conversation and a bit of a spineless, just waiting for things to paper over.
Okay, and Doc, last question. How does this affect China's view of Taiwan? Anything seismic there? Anything that will make that question?
Yeah, देखिए अगर China is thinking of itself as a superpower that is now willing to stamp its authority, this is the best time, right? I mean, distracted US military assets limited, nobody's really talking about it. But as I said, China ने दोबारा ये prove किया है कि they just feel they are not ready to be a superpower, for better or for worse. But they haven't stood up for Iran in that sense. Clandestinely चीजें हो रही हैं, obviously support है, etc. But they haven't come to the party, and they've actually proven to everybody that US remains the unfettered military power and the only real hard-nosed Machiavellian superpower in the world. Now many would say that's good, China shouldn't adorn that, but that also means then that they may not take advantage of the opportunity that may be there, and they may play the long game still.
ठीक है जी. And one last question, sir. I'm sorry, they keep popping up. What happens if Iran succeeds in making a nuclear weapon in the next few weeks?
In next few weeks में हो नहीं सकता. It's just physically impossible. What I can tell you is that if the Iranian regime survives by hook or by crook, they will pursue this path now. Because एक चीज दुनिया में prove हो गई है 100% that the only guarantee against this kind of invasion is a nuclear weapon. You can look at any case and it will lead you to the same conclusion. And अब अगर उन्होंने अभी तक तो they've played ball, कभी करते हैं कभी बात करते हैं, but अब I think they're going to pursue it whichever way they can. Whether they get there or not, I don't know. But this idea कि वो 2 हफ्ते 4 हफ्ते 6 हफ्ते, that's just not possible. So I think we shouldn't even think about that.
Dr. Moeed, thank you so much. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much. That was tremendous. And we look forward to staying in touch with you. Please feel free.
Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to, you're more than welcome.
I'll log in from my phone now because I'm on the move, but I would like to hear others. I'll join. Thank you, Ji. Thank you very much.
Salman Saab, welcome. Thank you very much, Ji. Great to have you with us. And over to you, sir.
Thank you, Javed Saab. Thank you very much for inviting me. I guess I'm going to share some thoughts on the geoeconomic picture. I'm sure Dr. Moeed Yusuf must have covered the Pakistan-centric angle as well. But I'm going to share from a more global perspective what we are seeing, what we are watching, and what are we focused on right now. Let me start by sharing some slides which I've got, which I think will probably anchor the conversation a bit better. I don't know if you can see the slides.
Yes, sir.
Perfect. So this picture I want to show everyone because this is something we have been focused on for many months now. As this great rivalry between US and China started becoming more visible and more concrete. It started off with obviously the trade war, Liberation Day. Last year, China was clearly singled out for some very high significant tariffs. Then we saw the ebb and flow of that high tariff strategy from the Trump administration and some domestic resistance to that as well. But it's useful to look at the world through the lens of choke points. And this is the list of the very important choke points which are critical for energy, but also for goods transfer across the globe. So we were in the camp that some kinetic action will happen in Iran. You have this interest of Israel after the 12-day war last year. Then you have obviously the US interests which somehow overlap, but they're not the same as Israeli interests. But the Strait of Hormuz was an important interest for US, mainly because the US dependence on Persian Gulf oil is at an all-time low level. So only 3% of the Persian Gulf oil goes to the US. US is a net exporter of energy, and it's one of the reasons why they have been far more immunized or insulated from this shock compared to, for example, Asia and Europe. But Strait of Hormuz, given that around 47% of China's energy supply passes through the Hormuz Strait, gas, LNG flows to Europe post the Russia-Ukraine war. So it's a critical choke point, and we do think that that was one of the motivations why to take on a weakened Iranian regime by these two military powers, and one of them is a superpower. But the way things have panned out, that Iran has been very successful in contesting the strait, and the regime, obviously, now I think the consensus is that the regime is going to survive. I think the first few days markets were a bit more complacent about it, but once, after seeing the Iranian retaliation, how broad-based it is, they included the GCC into it as well, and the institutionalized nature of the Iranian governance structure, given that they keep on taking the decapitation, the sequential decapitation which is happening, still the regime is intact. What is the most important, I think, element right now is that the strait is now going to be permanently contested, because it's a big leverage point for Iran, given the beauty of their geography, and also the asymmetric warfare they have perfected with cheap drones, especially. So these trade points and choke points are important. They are going to be critical in this great power rivalry. The second one is about Bab el-Mandeb one, which we are watching very carefully, which is the Red Sea checkpoint, which Houthis can activate. But that will affect east-west goods transfer, so more likely between create tensions on the flows between China and Europe. And again, even though the US has to take responsibility for it, but they economically they are more immunized to this disruption and see second order effects of it, given that markets are pricing, especially in energy, higher oil prices, than they have impact on the domestic politics of US. So this choke point world is important to understand. So China has been a very astute geopolitical player, I must say. They have been building up their inventories in energy since Venezuela oil. And more importantly, they have this structural hedge they created through shifting towards renewables over the last 10, 15 years, especially, and then becoming a superpower in renewables. So they have reduced their dependence on these choke points, but still at this stage, they have a dependence on the Strait of Hormuz, which they can buffer in the short term because of these very high inventories and switching to coal. But let's not forget that it's China in the great power game, which is more exposed to the strait than it is US. And then US has also many options if this disruption continues to intervene in their own oil markets. There were some rumors about that as well. And basically make this a shock for the rest of the world. So how we are thinking about this is that we are still in the camp that this is a prolonged conflict, at least a multi-week conflict. Iran obviously holds some important cards here, but they are also taking a lot of economic and military pain as a result of this war. And at some point, you would have to have mediation kick in, possibly led by Russia and China, and Pakistan may have a role to play as well, given that they have alliance, the defense pact with Saudi. But this choke point, vision is important because this is the beginning. This is the end of the beginning of this new world order, rather than the beginning of the end. You have multiple, conflicts still live. Russia-Ukraine will be impacted by this. It will change the calculus or shape the calculus of China on Taiwan. So there are some very important fault lines which can be connected to this immediate geopolitical issue we are seeing. So we're not seeing this as an event. We think this is, a symptom of the changes of the underlying global world order, where US is now, acting more like a classic hegemon rather than the rule-based order we were used to since World War II. And this has been our view for some time now, as regular readers know, that we have been focused on a world which is more hard power centric, and where military power becomes far more important than pure economic power, as we are seeing with the GCC currently. So if just to show you some points on the strait itself, the strait is very critical. I mean, this is percentage of global trade, not percentage of total demand. So 38% of tradable oil passes through the strait. But this is not just about oil. This is also about fertilizers, chemicals, dry bulk to a certain extent. Although the total traffic has collapsed on official numbers, we do know that Russia, Chinese, and Pakistani tankers are passing through the strait right now. So Iran has become the hegemon and controller of the strait right now. So you have to directly speak to them, if you will, for passage. But even some kind of a resolution comes in, we don't think that we are going to go back to the way it was. So sea lanes and global sea lanes, including the strait itself, we think will remain weaponized for geopolitical purposes, and economics takes a back seat because now the world of free-flowing sea lanes are no longer in place, and you have implications on geopolitical risk premium markets, the changing in the the stack of who holds the power in this new world order. So the key, I think, elements I want to highlight is that this is something, again, I'm reiterating some of the points I've been sharing for some time now, especially in Pakistan, that this is not a world where economics alone dominates outcomes or the positioning of powers. Hard power, military-centric power is quite important. We also seeing in the general direction that non-US nuclear powers are starting to take land. So, the Lebanon issue right now for Israel starting to take land in Lebanon, in addition to what they did with Gaza and Palestine. Russia will end up taking land in Ukraine. Now you also have the China-Taiwan question there. But this is a major shift that post-World War II rule-based order, smaller countries, economically more centric countries had a special place, were protected in some shape or form by that rule-based world order. We think that underlying assumption is being challenged, whereby you are not going to see any more pure economic power being dominating outcomes and political outcomes, economic outcomes, and conflict outcomes. And GCC coming under pressure and the city states coming under pressure is a big evidence of that pure economic power and assets in liquid financial assets are not the only source of power you hold right now in this kind of world. In terms of macro impact of this for different regions, I'm sure we've been discussing in Pakistan as well, and what the impact of Pakistan obviously being more exposed short term to this oil energy price increases, given their weak shock absorption capacity. Although I may highlight that a move towards renewables and solar has immunized and protected Pakistan. It could have been much worse for them if the renewables and the solar technology was not deployed in Pakistan, which I think is important geopolitical, although probably not done due to geopolitical reasons, but certainly turned out to be a geopolitical hedge to these high energy prices. So right now the macro shock is manageable at around $100. And we do think that oil will carry a geopolitical risk premium after some kind of resolution comes into play, because all the parties have interest for this to be wrapped down at some stage. Iran is also taking a lot of cost by keeping the strait closed because the war keeps on going. But this is a stagflationary mix to the picture. Oil demand is inelastic in the short term. It's painful to reduce oil demand, and you do need higher prices to destroy oil demand, because the disruption is around 10 to 12% currently. And that disruption will add on, because you are seeing production shutdowns in GCC, because the storage are getting filled. So given that the transit is almost blocked, so that disruption will carry for months. And more importantly, now we are going to end up in a world where the strait is politicized and militarized, and Iran being a big arbitrator of who uses the strait or not, and the US attempts have so far failed to find a military solution to the strait. So basically, we think that a diplomatic solution will need to be found. But that also means that Iran regime has now found its hedge against further probability of conflicts, because remember, this is the second time they have been attacked in the last 12 months. So in terms of the mapping and the country risks of the countries we are mostly invested in, but I can share Pakistan mapping here as well. It will be more in the bottom part of it, because of our reliance on the strait and our reliance on oil exports. 80% of our energy is imported on the fossil fuel side, and most of that comes through the strait. So it's predominantly becoming a more Asia-centric shock. China is somewhere in the middle, but they have a lot of inventories. 200 days if you add the commercial stocks as well right now. But countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam are quite exposed in those bigger markets, if you will, and Pakistan will be similar in that category. But at the same time, Pakistan has advantage because obviously we have shown that we are getting our tankers through, and that's where strong military strength comes into play, because the other countries don't have that choice so far. And then, of course, our geography as well is important, but we are being exposed to the price shock unless until some geopolitical deal is done, which is important to consider, given that Pakistan does provide defense cover, at least to Saudi. So how are we seeing the whole, global setup? We remain in the camp. We have been flagging this for some time now, that we are moving towards a fragmented world where you will start to see blocks appear. So these blocks become more and more self-reliant and independent. So the economic relationships continue to get degraded. This geopolitical issue should not be seen in isolation. It should be seen with the structural shift in US behavior as a hegemon. So under the Trump administration, we saw the trade war, the tariffs, which were swallowed by the rest of the world. Didn't have much pushback apart from China, where you saw the truce or the temporary truce come into play as China used the rare earth metal guard on US. Which they are not, i.e. US is unable to replace, at least in the short term. But now US has controlled Venezuela oil supply. That was, they have pushed out China from Panama Canal. They tried to take the strait, but that didn't work out, as we know. But we do think that trust is gonna keep getting deteriorated. Will keep deteriorating between the key economic and security blocks. Your security is going to become more adversarial. Technology is going to become more separated. So independent tech ecosystems start to appear. AI is part of that stack, increasingly being seen as more sovereign technology with dual purpose manifestations, both civilian and military. So you start to see more clear sign of US bloc, which will be focused more on the Western Hemisphere, push towards European bloc. The European and US relationships are once again stressed because of this geopolitical event. We saw the stress during Greenland situation, and then before that with trade war. Russia-Ukraine is another important stress point. So NATO basically becomes quite weak and, frankly speaking, non-existent. So you basically start to see a world where economic relationship continue to degrade, security becomes adversarial, and technology becomes more and more independent, and Europe has a lot more work to do on that front than China, for example, vis-a-vis US, which dominates on the technology side. So who are the winners and losers of this world? I think the winners are nations with large domestic markets and very large militaries, which can basically use those militaries to change economic and political outcomes. The losers are open economies and the beneficiaries of globalization, especially economies which have not invested in their military. So we all also see shift towards more military spending, defense, especially in GCC, I'm sure, given that the US security cover turned out to be a liability rather than a strength. We'll see an economic world where tariffs are here to stay, even though the US government has, US Supreme Court has taken down AIIB, but there are other, statutes US can use, especially Section 301 investigations, Section 338, to rebuild that tariff wall. Overall, lower trade volumes, more self-reliance, more bilateral trade between allies rather than purely driven by economic efficiency. So the security of supply chains becomes far more important. Who can deliver you the critical supply chains on food and energy and fertilizers and you name it, in a contested world. So this is not a world of open sea lanes and open globalization. So globalization continues to come under pressure as these blocks continue to form as the world moves towards a more low trust calibration. So a world of wars, hopefully rather than world war, where all the open conflicts become more and more obvious and turn into military solutions, or try to find military solutions rather than diplomatic, multilateralism being on the backseat. You can see that UN has no role to play right now in the Iran conflict. They are running out of money because US has stopped funding them, and China hasn't stepped up on the multilateral side of things. So I'm from that long-term perspective, I think if you use this template and then map countries, then Pakistan structurally is a winner. Of course, the short-term risk and stress is there because of our weak starting positions on the economic front. But once you pass through these events, the structural recalibration of the world does benefit Pakistan. That has been my view for some time, which is that you need to have large domestic markets, which need to be unlocked, of course, but a large military has a very important role to play now to secure those supply chains, to enforce contracts, and make sure that you are immunized to these spreading conflicts. And then the flip side is the open economies, the beneficiaries of globalizations start to become to lose ground in this kind of world. So overall, global growth does come down at a steady state level because you will see less globalization. China will have to change its economic model. It's still very growth oriented. US is becoming more and more closed to foreign trade. You'll also start to see similar dynamics taking hold in Europe. We are already seeing that on the defense side. We do think that will spread out to other sectors as well. The tension between Europe and China is also quite severe right now on the economic front because China has been dumping a lot in Europe by refusing to appreciate their currency, while euro has done a lot of the appreciation versus the dollar. So those economic tensions will remain, and ultimately the equilibrium or steady state we had, where US was the perma consumer, consuming around 28% of global world consumption, whilst Europe and China were the main producers, if you will, and US basically starting to either charge for that access through tariffs, and more reliance on domestic production, or at least production in their own sphere of influence, which is increasingly the Western sphere. So I won't be surprised that something happens to Cuba, in the next few days and weeks. Will be a nice distraction as well. But the Western Hemisphere becomes much more dominated by US centricity, whilst Europe starts to build its own reliance, as I mentioned, and then China will need to start working on a new economic model, which is potentially have to be more domestic demand driven. So it's a new world in the sense that you are now military and security is sovereignty, safety of supply chains, security of those supply chains, and the sea lanes are far more important variables than what is the cheapest and the most efficient way to service your own demand. So and this conflict and this war has to be seen within that broader context of a big trend which was already in play, and would only energize the lack of trust between these two key blocks further. And I think the major manifestation of that will be US and Europe, and the tensions there, and the more clearer demise of NATO, if you will, and then the consequent implications on how reliance and economic sovereignty and strategic autonomy starts to be financed, and it affects its effects on capital allocation, which we are focused on, of course, given our business and given our area of interest, which will have to take place in the years ahead. So those are some of the key themes we are looking at. I will just end up by saying that we think that oil will carry a geopolitical risk premium. We expect oil to average around $80-$85 now for the rest of the year. Some geopolitical risk premium will come off once this conflict is resolved in some shape or form. But the spike risk to 120, 125 is pretty high right now. We put a 35 to 40% probability that happens over the next few weeks, especially over the next couple of weeks, because production shut-ins will start to happen. So the short-term pain, I'm saying that from Pakistan perspective, risk is still quite severe. But the longer-term opportunity and challenges set is also opening up, especially the geographical positioning of Pakistan, and of course the fact that Pakistan is as much a Middle East player, even a peripheral at this stage, as much it is a South Asian player. So there's some big questions and big changes in the way perspectives need to be shaped in Pakistan as well, because we tend to be a very geopolitically active country, and that has been clear for the last 40 years, because this is the third time a superpower of the day has attacked our neighbor. So since the late 1970s, and by the way, we don't have any say in this. In fact, we criticize ourselves a lot, but frankly speaking, we don't have any say if Soviet Union is going to attack Afghanistan, or US is going to attack Afghanistan, and now US and Israel doing what they're doing to Iran. So we remain a very geopolitical active country, which has implications on domestic politics, domestic economics, as much as, of course, our own policy choices. But that is not going to go away. Pakistan is going to remain very geopolitically active, and it has to be thought through as a given reality, rather than something which is happening on the side. So I'll end my remarks here and hand the floor back to you, Javed sir.
That was terrific. Just a quick question for you. What's your 2-minute take on equity markets, the prospects for equity markets for the next 6 to 8 months?
So global equity markets have absorbed the shock pretty well so far. I mean, mainly because US equities have been, more or less insulated. There is a big AI theme and other factors also running in the background. The capex runs are, capex numbers are big. US is benefiting from that fiscal stimulus which was done last year. And then more pressure has come on Asian markets, even though the volatility has been quite high. The damage is around single high digits, around 5-7%, depending on the market you look at. Even though the volatility, for example, in Korea and Taiwan and Japan was quite significant ones. So far, the equity market is absorbing this, I think, in a very mature manner. Positioning has been quite important as well. But our view is that the next 2 weeks are important in the sense, like, if oil spikes above 120.25, you'll see a more bigger pressure on equities, because then the growth forecast will also start coming down. But the markets are also very open to the possibility that this can be wrapped down, quickly, given how US administration has been working. So it's that tightrope we are navigating currently. We are not expecting massive hikes from the key central banks here. I think they will be quite cautious right now. But oil importers, especially those with low inventories, are vulnerable, and that includes the Pakistan market, right? Relatively speaking. But China, for example, has been a safe haven because of the inventory numbers I showed you, plus the fact that the share of energy has been coming down. So we expect that to remain the case. But this is a non-linear game, in the sense, like, the more disruption continues, the more pressure on oil importers will come through, because oil demand has to be destroyed, because you have a disruption of 12% in the global oil balance right now. So the next 2 weeks are critical here. But overall, so far, the equity markets are, with volatility, are absorbing the shock pretty confidently, if you will.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you so much for your time. And then do please stay on. We have one more session, which we're going to do with Samiullah Tariq Saab, who's going to talk a little bit more about the energy business and the energy industry. So, Samiullah Saab,
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Pakistan Business Council and Javed Saab, for inviting me. It was very enlightening to hear the speeches before me. They were very nice. So can you see the presentation?
Easy, bilkul.
So I just wanted to continue from where other people ended, that Pakistan is one of the most affected countries out of this crisis. Basically, first of all, because of its proximity, that Pakistan is a neighbor of Iran, and obviously majority of our energy needs were met via Strait of Hormuz, and approximately 80% of Pakistan's fossil fuels, including LNG and petroleum products, were sourced from this area. So historically, Pakistan has been dependent on gas as its major energy source, but over years, with the decline in gas inventories, as well as the reserves, as well as the invent of solar, the dependence has somewhat come down, and now we are also dependent on nuclear and hydroelectricity, as well as on coal. So energy consumption has declined because of, obviously, the cost of energy has gone up significantly in terms of PKR, and purchasing power has also been constrained. So consumption of oil and gas has come down over years. Sector consumption, if you see that over time, the overarching theme is the advent of renewable energy, especially solar. And as you've rightly mentioned, one of the panelists, that the solar energy revolution has saved Pakistan a lot from this crisis, or else the impact would have been much higher. The overall energy consumption and the industrial demand has gone down significantly. The industrial consumption has also gone down from the grid because of availability issue, as well as the high cost of electricity on the grid. The transportation share has also gone down because of the fact that diesel and petrol prices are now predominantly much higher if we calculated them in PKR terms, and they're very high in terms of purchasing power for the domestic population. And the same is true for so if you now come to the crux of the issue, that we are majorly dependent on imports for our motor gasoline and diesel. For diesel, approximately 30% of our total consumption is imported, but for gasoline, approximately 60 to 70% is imported. Both of them were imported majorly from Middle Eastern countries, and for the diesel, majority of the diesel used to come from Kuwait because of a G2G agreement, while petroleum, the motor gasoline was imported from all over the Middle East, and majority of the OMCs used to import cargoes for motor gasoline. So other than Attak refinery, majority of all other refineries are now dependent on imported crude, especially Parco, NRL, and PRL. So most of the petrol is imported. Approximately 70% of our crude oil is also imported. So not only Pakistan is dependent on imports for its petroleum products demand, the LNG, but also for crude oil. So if you see that all other panelists they're saying that after $100, $125, the shock is going to be major for the global economy. So first of all, Pakistan is much more dependent on the energy imports as a percent of GDP are much higher for Pakistan as compared to other countries because of its nascent nature and low value addition in the economy. Secondly, the crude oil which we are dependent on, or the petroleum products, those benchmarks are significantly higher compared to WTI or Brent. For example, the major benchmark for our crude oil imports is Dubai Light, which was at $145 last week. Yesterday it closed at $157. The diesel which we import, which is called gas oil, was trading at $189 last week. This was traded at $192 yesterday, and the gasoline was trading around $130 a barrel. So Pakistan, so when we calculate $10 for each for $1.5 billion impact on our balance of payment, we've already had an impact of more than $70 to $80 because before this conflict started, the prices were around $70, $75 for crude oil, and the petroleum products were trading around $75, $80 per barrel. So spreads have also widened significantly. Jet fuel prices have gone up significantly, and the prices for diesel, petrol, and the oil which we source have all gone up a lot. So because of the fact that the traffic at Strait of Hormuz is impacted, the prices for local for the products sourced from here have gone up a lot. Pakistan has a very low choice of importing these petroleum products and crude oil from US or Europe or other places where prices are lower. For example, the price of WTI or Brent oil is $50 lower compared to Dubai Light or Arab Light. But because of the huge voyage time, Pakistan is unable to import these products from there. The chain is going to get affected. So as the other panelists discussed in detail, the global choke points, and because of the fact that 21 million barrels of oil is passing through Strait of Hormuz, which is approximately 26% of global traded oil. So that was a significant impact on Pakistan, because Pakistan was the first country out of the strait just right beside Iran. So it had a significant impact on Pakistan. So obviously this was the chain of events which other panelists have already talked about, that how these events took place, which has had an impact on the supply of oil as well as the prices of the products. So this is the largest oil supply shock in the history of the world because of the fact that approximately 20 million barrels of potential oil disruption is taking place as a result of this event, which is much bigger than the previous issues like previous events like Iranian Revolution, the Arab-Israel War in 1973, the Gulf War of 1990, and Iran-Iraq War in 1980. Majority of the incremental oil price is because of the geopolitical risk contribution, because of the supply risk that is being entailed along with the trade in oil. And as the other panelists already talked about, that the commercial ships traffic out of Strait of Hormuz is almost non-existent. This was the data of March 10th. The situation remains the same, other than one or two carriers which have been able to come out of the strait, which includes some cargoes for Pakistan as well. But yes, the trade for crude oil, LPG, LNG, all has been affected. Even Pakistan is impacted because of the trade stoppage for container ships and bulk carriers. But yes, India, for example, is more impacted because of the LPG tankers, but Pakistan is impacted on all first three impacts: the crude oil, the LPG, and the LNG tankers. So this was the forecast of oil as per Bloomberg, that oil is expected if the Strait of Hormuz is closed for 3 months, oil prices could go up to $164, and it's going to remain elevated till September. So the relevant point over here is that for Pakistan, the crude oil price is already at $157, as we already saw that the Dubai crude price is $157, which is the major benchmark used by Pakistani refiners, who are the major importers of crude oil from this region. So even if they buy some crude oil which is not Dubai crude, the trading benchmark is Dubai crude, after which there's some discount or premium is being added as per the API or the suitability of oil to that refinery. So obviously we're already very much impacted. So the global benchmark for crude oil was WTI or Brent, $106, but for Pakistan it was $134. This was some days back. The landed cost goes up to $144. While the crude oil pricing for Pakistan is dependent on Platts benchmark, which is by S&P. The crude oil, the petrol price was $120, for example. So there's a significant premium over the global petrol price, and the diesel price was $170. So that is a significant premium over this crude oil price. So there is a significant quagmire for Pakistani refineries as well, because the petrol price is lower than the crude oil price. So they have a negative crack spread on that, and the diesel price is significantly higher. And when PSO has conducted a tender 2 days back for supply of diesel to our to the country. So the premiums, which includes the freight as well as the insurance, so that is also coming at $20, which used to be $5 a barrel. So that is going to add significant cost to the imports as well as the pricing of petroleum. So this was from the last week when the government last increased the prices of petroleum products. So at an average of $132 a barrel, if you see that the closing price on that day was $150 on 6th March, but average was $132 because of the increasing trend of diesel price. So the closing price, so the average price was $132. The government decided to pass on 55 rupees on diesel that week, and absorbed the 30 rupees PDL in the prices of gasoline. So price of gasoline was only $95 that week. So prices have significantly gone up from there as well. If you see that on $95 a barrel, the price was ex-refinery price was 191 rupees. And at $132 a barrel, the ex-refinery price was 258 rupees. From here onwards, the government has not increased prices anymore, but but you see that the retail price of petroleum was 321 rupees on a price on 7th March, and the retail price of diesel was 336 rupees on 7th March. So the overall scenario is that if oil prices remain in this region where they are right now, so Arab Gulf mean at $153, the BOP impact on Pakistan is approximately $10 to $11 billion. So what we are seeing, the worst scenario, what other panelists were mentioning. So we are already in that region that the BOP impact is going to be significant, assuming this situation lasts for more than 6 months or 8 months. So yes, this impact is annualized, but monthly impact. For example, the monthly petroleum import bill for Pakistan in February was $1 billion, and the total import bill for petroleum products for 8 months was $10 billion. So the prices have almost doubled in the last month. So the impact is going to be $1 billion a month. So domestic liquidity for FX is going to be significantly impacted. There's going to be impact on CPI, on inflation as well as the impact on purchasing power and the economic impact, because of the fact that the Pakistan's majority GDP is made of consumption, and a lower purchasing power would result in significantly lower purchasing power and a lower GDP growth. So all of the major macroeconomic variables, including inflation, interest rate, economic growth, are going to be affected via this. So the point to highlight is that, first of all, the prices of oil relative to Pakistan or relevant to Pakistan are significantly higher compared to those quoted in WTI and Brent prices. Secondly, the government has not passed on the impact on the petroleum prices for a week, and they intend to not pass on the impact for this week as well. They probably might pass on the impact after the Eid, but at present, the impact on price of diesel of the current price is which is left to be passed on is approximately 120 rupees a liter, and the impact of not passing on the impact and the remaining price impact which has to be passed on petrol price is approximately 71 rupees a liter. So that is going to be significant jolt to the inflationary environment, to the purchasing power, as well as probably to the policy rate as well, because interest rate has to be, in my view, it would have to be increased because of the significant change in the inflation expectations for the rest of the year. So that was it from my side. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Ji. I think that was terrific and quite scary. Murtaza Saab, any questions, or Salman Saab, any questions on Tariq Saab's presentation?
Maybe one question from my side.
Yeah.
As you're thinking about these transmission channels, how does the levy changes can mitigate this shock, or do you think that because of IMF there is not much space for the levy to be changed?
At present, diesel has a levy of 55 rupees, but the government is paying PDC of 75 rupees from its own pocket. So actively, there is no levy on diesel right now because of the fact that the refinery price is significantly higher compared to the retail price.
So that's already negative.
Yeah, it's already negative. So there is not much room left already. So if you now factor in the increase from there, further increase in diesel price from there, so obviously there is not much room left for the government. The government had already funded for a week. They had to fund 23 billion rupees. For this week, I assume they'll have to put in approximately 30 billion rupees a month. If you annualize this is going to be a number more than a 1 trillion rupee impact on the fiscal balance, which is going to be significant. And obviously, the economic impact is that if you're not adjusting or increasing the price of petroleum as per the international prices, the behavioral impact on the population is also not good. people would continue to consume it as it's a regular product. So passing on is important. The government does not have, in my view, the government does not have the ability to retain the impact, the fiscal ability, as well as the because of the fragile balance of payment situation. So that is my view. And yes, and if you talk about the levy, that petroleum levy is a federal revenue. It is taken as a federal revenue, and that is a major component used for domestic debt servicing. The government imposed a huge levy because of the fact that it goes directly into the federal kitty and does not goes into the sharing pool with the provinces.
Thank you.
Can I
Okay.
also ask a question, Samiullah? Very nice presentation. I
Sure.
was just wondering, so you presented very nicely on the consequences of a price increase. How far are we from having to contemplate supply shortages, actually just not being able to find enough petrol or diesel in Pakistan, either because shipments are not arriving or because we're running out of foreign exchange to be able to pay for these things? How far are we from sort of a rationing type situation in your view?
Absolutely, that is also a possibility. First of all, that on average, Pakistan has reserves of approximately 20 to 25 days of petroleum products in our country, which is in the form of crude oil, petrol, diesel, LPG, etc. If you compare it to India or other countries, those reserves are significantly higher. In India, they have a reserve of approximately 75 days. They also have a strategic petroleum reserve for their own country. Secondly, the ability to import is obviously constrained by the fragile balance of payment situation. Obviously, as I understand that if at an elevated import bill, we won't be able to continue for more than 2 months at these prices, and there has to be rationing pulled in. And as you rightly mentioned in your presentation, that there has to be a major effort towards conservation of petroleum products via a variety of modes, like using work from home or shutting down, like Sri Lanka has done. That they've come to a 4-day work week. So that is also a possibility. But yes, because of the fact that majority of the petroleum products are imported, and they're imported from the south and transported to the north. So there is more chance of shortage in the north because of the fact that all petroleum products are transported via pipelines or trucks to those areas. And finally, there is also a possibility that Pakistan is unable to secure sufficient oil or crude oil or petroleum products for use by its domestic population. But there has been somewhat comfort on that area when 2 or 3 cargoes were allowed by Iran to Pakistani cargoes to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. However, that does not hide the fact that we have we have to pay for those cargoes in any way on those benchmark prices. So that does not hide the fact that we have less money or less dollars to purchase those cargoes at these prices. So there has to be that they have to do something about this. The government is thinking to give a targeted subsidy to motorcycles and rickshaws, but I think it's going to be difficult to implement that subsidy in this short time.
Thank you very much, Samiullah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you, Ji. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Salman Saab, Murtaza Saab, Samiullah Saab, and thank you everyone who's on the call. I think there's just one question that's come, and that does the military have its own reserves? Tariq Saab?
I think they don't have they have their own reserve, but that's not disclosed yet. But generally, they're given preference in the supply. Like at present, if you've seen in the news that for jet fuel, military has been given priority because there are operations going on in Afghanistan as well. So for commercial aircrafts operating out of airports in Pakistan, they have instructed them to fill up from their original airports and fill up less from here, which is only necessary. So definitely the defense consumption is given preference over commercial consumption for jet fuel and other fuels.
Okay. Okay, Ji, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, everyone from PBC for dialing in, and take care. Thank you.